Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar, and a bit of a serious video, one that I really hope a lot of you take to heart. Now, in the last couple of weeks, I've covered things like emergency alert systems, and frankly, we've even dabbled the surface on a worldwide geopolitical tension. If you don't know, there's definitely some problems going on in Europe right now. Now, to understand, I don't really like to dive into these situations because I'm not really an expert in a lot of that stuff, but what I do like to dive into is the world of computer hacking and cybersecurity and keeping your data safe. Because if it's one thing you've learned on my channel is I have severe paranoia and your data is worth more than you, okay? Yes, the data you generate is actually worth more than you. If that depresses you, welcome to the cyberpunk future of 2022. Now, to understand, there have been a lot of cyber attacks going on. There's actually a cyber war that's been happening in the last few days. Now, to understand, a cyber attack, a cyber war, is definitely something that is much more on the cards for every country involved, okay? To understand, we've looked at this in a lot of the malware that we've covered on this channel, specifically the ransomware stuff, okay? Anytime you see something that's complicated, done on a mass scale, it's usually a nation-state service behind the entire affair. Now, to understand, nation-state is a pretty simple concept to understand. Basically, it's a hacking group that exists in countries like the United States, in countries like Russia, in countries like China, in countries like Iran, Israel, North Korea, Saudi Arabia, any real country that has good, proper resources. It's a hacker group that sits in there. They basically hack the world around, and because if they get caught, because if something happens, well, they can always fall back on the protection of the big government that's involved. And usually, the attacks that they carry out are done at such a large scale that somebody small time, even a mid-level group, couldn't actually achieve those same effects. If you ever see something happen massively, it's almost usually a cause from a nation-state actor, okay? Now, in the last few days, Microsoft got called in because they were the ones leading the charge on defending Ukrainian systems because of the various cyber attacks that have been going on. Even Ukrainians themselves have sat down and actually decided to forge together and cobble whatever they can to make some level of a cyber threat response group. And to understand, these aren't people sitting in army fatigues in front of keyboards and mice. These are actually people coming together to stop all the attacks that are happening on critical infrastructures every single day, all right, basically just trying to stay on top of a sea that's basically storming on top of them. Now, to get things going, okay, everything is connected to the internet, basically, all right? Aside from really critical things like nuclear weapons, thank God, aren't necessarily connected to the internet at large, okay? In fact, at least a chunk of them, as far as I've been able to know, as far as I've researched, because this isn't really common knowledge, a lot of them can even be tied back to like floppy disk era days. Thank God, actually, I was wrong here. The United States did update beyond the need for a floppy disk. That being said, though, these things aren't connected to the internet, and you still require a human being to turn the keys when launching one of these bad boys. Now, to be real, thank God those aren't connected to the internet, but you know what is? Things like critical infrastructure, power grids, things like medical systems, governmental infrastructure, big businesses, banks, and a lot of these things, when they're connected to the internet, are susceptible to getting attacked. And it's these situations, these attacks that can cause some serious damage. Earlier, last year, we looked at biggest cyber attacks in history, okay? We looked at things like the Colonial Pipeline hack. We looked at big hacks that seem to originate from the Russian Federation. And these hacks not only leaked a massive amount of data, but some cases, they actually crippled critical infrastructure. For some days, there were literal, resources, natural resources that people needed that they couldn't get access to because of a cyber attack. So it's not just moving ones and zeros. This could really cripple things head on. One of the emergency alert scenarios that I've always seen that always really get to me are things like blackouts. Could you imagine what would happen to the world if you lost the power grid? Yeah, you might think, maybe I'll sit in the dark for a few weeks, maybe a month. Have you ever considered how much that can damage a system? How much load that can put onto serious critical infrastructure, like hospitals, for instance, who may only have a limited amount of power to be generating off of backup generators that they have. These things aren't designed to be running constantly. So again, if you cut off just a power grid, you can cause those serious damages, which is why there are a lot of people that sit down spending 24 hours a day to make sure this doesn't happen. And because of heightened tensions, it's happening, buckos. It really is. There's a couple attacks to really watch out for. Now, to start off, one of the attacks, which I believe isn't really relegated to it, Now, what should you be watching out for? Well, if you go back into history real quick, one of the attacks that exists is Hermetic Wiper. Now, there's a really good write-up on it by Sentinel-1, but I'll go over the real key points for you real quick. Now, Hermetic Wiper, and I want you to kind of envision this as sort of an umbrella term for a lot of malwares that copy the same sort of, symptomology that this carries. In a lot of cases, it's wiping out drives. It's killing the boot record. To understand what a boot record is, every hard drive has a boot sector written on it, typically in the first little phase. When this is wiped, it basically means the computer is inoperable until either that boot record is fixed or, you just re-image systems, right? So when that boot record is gone, that means the system is inoperable, okay? Until, of course, that is fixed. Now, looking into Hermetic Wiper, for instance, one of the first things they found out was a Trojan that was sent to them from a company known as Hermetica Digital Limited. Now, this is a digital certificate that is made to sign drivers, okay? The way that they attacked this is they actually utilized a driver, all right, that would actually do partition management. So in order to make this driver valid, they basically created what appeared to be a shell company or appropriating a defunct company to issue this legitimate digital certificate. This certificate would then be used to install drivers, and once that driver was installed, which was very small, the malware itself is really tiny. I think it's somewhere around the term of like 130 kilobytes or so. But basically, what this malware effectively did was it started to wipe the boot record, okay? So in a lot of cases, when you look deep into the system, it was actually enumerating those physical drives, and it was wiping those boot sectors out. It wasn't just wiping the boot sector, it was corrupting the entire partition. Remember, the big important factor of this is corruption of files and things in partitions. What's also really interesting was a decoy that was sent alongside it to help mask these original malwares, okay? Mask a lot of these Hermetic Wiper malwares too. Malware known as Party Ticket, okay? And if you look inside Party Ticket, what's really wild and massive out there is when you look through the code and the assembly on it, what they actually did was give out little signs, they gave out little nuggets to basically taunt the United States government, okay? They basically taunted the Biden administration. There were literally folders where they had 403 for Biden, 403 for Biden, White House. They were literally taunting the United States government, okay? That takes some serious nutsacks, okay? They even went as far as to type in all these fake ransomware notes. Again, this ransomware was a decoy. Thank you for your vote. All your files, documents, photos, videos, databases have been successfully encrypted. Do not try to decrypt them yourself. It's impossible. It's just a business, and we only care about getting benefits. The only way to get your file back is to contact us and get further instructions. To prove that we have a decryptor, send us any encrypted file, and we'll send it back to you decrypted. This is our guarantee. Again, a lot of this was basically just a decoy to cover up the fact that Hermetic Wiper was doing its nasty deeds. Now, remember when I told you that this is kind of an umbrella term when you look at Hermetic Wiper? What I wanted to show you was how this malware worked initially. But see, Microsoft, as far back as January 15th of this year, before everything hit the fan, Microsoft has started detecting malware in Ukrainian systems, in their organizations. So in a lot of cases, Microsoft has dubbed this Foxblade, but the other term that you can always look at is Whispergate, okay? Now, to understand what Whispergate is it is incredibly disruptive. It's the same type of wiping malware, but let's get down through a play-by-play of how this occurs. Now, what it does is it launches stage 1, which is overwriting the master boot record and displaying a faked ransom note. Again, the master boot record is basically where it stores the instructions to boot into your operating system, and it's sort of that first part of your partition. Now, what they did was they replaced this with a ransom note. Your hard drive has been corrupted. In case you want to recover all hard drives of your organization, you should pay us $10K via Bitcoin wallet. And here they have a Bitcoin wallet, which we actually opened up here and found out that they had $4.64 sent to it. Okay, so not a massive amount or anything, and thank God no one fell for it. Now, of course, they gave this message, they gave a Tox ID, and then your organization name will give you contact for further instructions. Now, here is the wild thing, okay? To understand, this again is a nice little way to cover up what's actually about to happen. See, when you get ransomware, okay, you tend to think of how to handle this cybersecurity situation a little differently. So when people looked at this, they wondered, okay, maybe I'm just getting, a ransomware attack. But really, once it started wiping the master boot record, stage 2 would then actually kick in. Now, stage 2, using a Discord CDN, basically through their Discord server, the Discord, cloud distribution network, which we've looked at on its own, they sent this payload over, which basically hunted for file types, specifically regarding like things like docx, PDF files, some Photoshop files, basically anything that they could hunt down and they could destroy. And basically this would locate files and it would just basically just destroy them. It would barrage them. It would overwrite the contents of those files with basically random bytes, okay? So basically it would just corrupt everything within. Now what you're seeing me try in this actual clip over here with stage 2 is trying to run this malware, and as you can see, Microsoft Defender is actually detecting this specific malware because it's been updated in their entire malware database. Now I've got a few files over here, for instance, and I wanted to see what the corruption was going to go on, and generally launching the situation showed me that stage 2 was going to then download further software. And here's an interesting aspect too, because the C2 server I believe is dead, because these things go up and down real quick, it seems as though the stage 2 is trying to send out and ask for instructions from a server that just no longer exists. That doesn't mean that what you're using isn't dangerous. This was done underneath a virtual machine on an air-gapped system, so it could not communicate with anything on a network. Again, do not try this stuff unless you know what you're doing, otherwise you risk complete infection. I know when it comes to this situation, I'm using the destructive world a whole heck of a lot, but the reality is that's just basically stating what's actually happening, okay? Basically, malware like this is designed specifically to destroy and damage systems, and again, if those systems are critical infrastructures, it could cause some serious issues. It can cause loss of service. It can cause a lot of headaches for every team involved back into it. And when those teams are crippled and paralyzed, imagine the kind of shenanigans that are happening in that moment from the actual malicious hostile agency behind those attacks. Now, in certain cases, the Russians are not the only ones with these weird implications of cyber attacks. The Chinese have also been noticed recently with Dakshin. Now, what is Dakshin? Dakshin is actually a malware that deeply penetrates into the most secure networks imaginable. And basically, by hijacking TCP connections, its initial design is to create multiple nodes and basically navigate through, again, those highly secure networks that are out there, so that it can stealthily attack and basically communicate back and forth between an attacker and the person being attacked. Now, in this case, Symantec actually had found that this malware was deployed in government organizations, but more importantly, in telecommunications and manufacturing. So we're in a supply chain issue. Manufacturing gets hit, shit hits the fan even harder. Telecommunications, yeah, imagine crippling the ability to speak back and forth. Imagine blinding and deafening an entire groups of people all at once, all out there. That's the kind of destructive stuff that we are looking into. Now, in a lot of cases, why I'm mentioning this when it specifically is targeting governmental organizations and when it's targeting, things like critical infrastructures, that's something to be worried about. What about you, the average person? Look, I'm not here to fearmonger somebody. To be real with you, fearmongering does nothing. It creates panic, and you can't get anything done in panic. Why am I even mentioning this to the extent that I am? Well, A, I find it interesting, but also a lot of these tools that are used against organizations like this eventually end up making their way to actual malicious hackers that can target you and me, that are more interested in targeting you and me. And so when these hackers get access to tools, you start to see hacks that are occurring on a more micro level in comparison to the stuff that we looked at. Now, what I mean by micro level in this case is a lot of our data flows through big giant companies, okay, at any given moment. Look, we're gamers, okay? Think about it like this. How much of our data flows through services like Steam, flows through services like Twitch, YouTube, NVIDIA, AMD? A lot of these big companies have access. Think about all the services you have made accounts under just to game, just to run software on your computer, okay? Just to install things like even keyboard drivers. So in this case, companies like NVIDIA were actually targeted recently. Their DLSS source code just got leaked. In fact, one of the letters that they had was, "We were into NVIDIA systems for about a week." This comes from the hackers. "We fastly escalated to admin of a lot of systems. We grabbed 1 terabyte of data. We grabbed the most important stuff, schematics, drivers, firmware." They grabbed schematics for GPUs that are well into the future. We are still waiting for NVIDIA to contact us. We're selling a full LHR v2, which is basically them getting rid of the low hash rate, sort of limits on a graphic card so they can mine crypto better. If NVIDIA doesn't contact us, we'll take action. And then please note, we're not state sponsored and we are not in politics at all. Again, I don't really believe any of that bullshit. But to understand, they hacked companies like Nvidia. Now, Nvidia doesn't treat its cybersecurity as a joke, actually very much the opposite. But it goes to show you that regardless of size or whatever, any company from as large as Google and Nvidia, all the way down to the small low-level business owner, can be immediately susceptible to any form of cyber attack. Because when we roll back to the beginning of the video, nation threat actors, nation-state level hackers, have the ability to compromise almost any system on the face of the planet. Okay, that is what it is. It's a grim reality we live in. So again, one of the things that you should be doing because of all this is probably changing up your passwords, probably making sure your systems are even more hardened than they are. And why is that? Because in the next few days, in the next few weeks, in the next few months, you're going to be reading a lot of stories about various hacks that have taken place and have just started to be discovered. See, we don't really know the true extent of a hack until it actually gets discovered months after it's done damage. You know, at this moment in time, any of your computers can be hacked, my system could be hacked, my accounts could be hacked. If you go to sites like Have I Been Pwned and just put in your email address, it's going to make you feel dirty knowing how much your data is actually breached on a daily basis. And really, cybersecurity is not something you just set and forget, it's something you constantly maintain and put it out to. Again, I don't know what system has been compromised or what networks have been compromised. At this moment, a lot of it is up to speculation. But given the agencies that have been involved in a lot of these cyber attacks the last few weeks, it's no doubt that some of the biggest companies could actually be infected. And I'm sure they're looking through as hard as they can to make sure that they aren't. But until then, the best you can really do is ensure all your systems are hardened. Things like your smartphones are hardened. Don't be downloading no weird shady applications or going to weird shady websites. You know who you are. And also, make sure that your passwords on a lot of these services are changed, and a lot of those situations are at least hardened. When it comes to passwords, how many of you actually use the same password or vary it a little bit between different accounts? That's a bad practice. And hey, people do it. I used to do it. And it's one of those situations where you really have to sit up, get down, and understand that at this moment in time, you really should start reassessing your cybersecurity real careful, because if you don't, a lot of things can get stolen. Your money can be looked into, your identity could be stolen, hell, even your most precious resources on your systems could be taken away. And hey, if we roll back to identity theft, that's a real scary rabbit hole to be going down into, and it's one that I gladly would like to cover sometime down the road in its entirety by itself. In the last few days, we've literally seen the worst kinds of malware just being thrown around as if it's nothing. Think of it like digital nuclear weapons just constantly being tossed around within each digital precise strikes against big giant threat actors. And of course, now that these tools are even more out in the wild and the scales have escalated, if you will, the people that are more interested in me and you now have a new set of tools to play around and work with. And it's something that we all should be a little bit weary of, and it's something we all should be very much focusing on as time goes on. The only thing scarier than getting hacked is the potential for critical infrastructure to unfortunately be hit. And if you're one of those people that works in these cybersecurity offices for a lot of these like critical infrastructure organizations, you already know what I'm talking about. You already know to be extra goddamn vigilant. But that said though, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mudahar, and I just wanted to talk about how the greatest cyber war is going on right now as we speak. That being said though, this is me, Muda, and hopefully I hope to cover a lot more of these cyber attack news in the years down. Not that I'm excited to see any of these things going, I just know the grim reality of the situation. No one is prepared for it. So really, let's just get excited to see how things escalate and what we can learn. This is me, Muda, and I am